The spring night of 1797 broke under a restless sky. Rain drummed on the roof of the royal chapel as a crypt caretaker made his rounds. The palace above slept, but in the silence beneath, he heard something that did not belong to storms or dripping stone: a faint metallic clink. At first he blamed rats. Then came a second sound, slow, deliberate, like fingertips against wood. Lantern in hand, he followed the echoes down the damp corridor lined with marble tombs until he reached the newest vault. 3 days earlier it had received the body of a 23-year-old princess, declared dead after a sudden fever. Royal funerals at the end of the 18th century were swift affairs. Physicians relied on sight and touch, a feather at the lips, a mirror to catch a fog of breath, a pulse under cold fingers. Epidemics demanded speed. A body was washed in rosewater, dressed in silk and velvet, sealed in cedar, lead, and oak, and lowered under stone before nightfall. The court followed this exact routine for the princess. The caretaker hesitated. Opening a royal coffin without permission meant prison. But the knocking returned, soft yet unmistakable. He summoned the chapel dean. Together they broke the wax seal and pried open the heavy lid. What they saw would never appear in official records. The princess no longer lay as she had been placed. Her shroud was torn, her face twisted toward the coffin's roof, her lips frozen in a final cry. Beneath her nails were splinters of cedar. She had been alive when she was entombed. By dawn, soldiers resealed the vault. The dean drafted a discreet note to the sovereign about a disturbance in the crypt, while a public communiqué mentioned only structural repairs. But whispers outran censorship. Servants spoke to printers. Pamphlets circulated before sunrise. Though most copies were seized, the rumor lived on in diaries and letters. The buried alive princess became an emblem of an older, wider fear, that anyone, rich or poor, could wake beneath the weight of a coffin lid. Whether every detail of this episode can be proven matters less than what it reveals. Across Europe and North America in the 18th and 19th centuries, premature burial was not folklore but a recognized hazard. Doctors admitted they had no fail-safe test for death. Comas, catalepsy, certain fevers, even hypothermia could mimic the stillness of the grave. In an age terrified of plague and cholera, the pressure to bury quickly only increased the risk. In 1740, the French anatomist Jacques-Benin Winslow warned in The Uncertainty of the Signs of Death that apparent death is not always real death, a caution tragically confirmed by occasional exhumations revealing disturbed coffins. Such discoveries fed a culture already haunted by revenants and ghosts. Coffee houses buzzed with macabre gossip. Newspapers printed sensational accounts of the dead returning to life. Writers from Mary Shelley to Edgar Allan Poe wove the terror into Gothic literature, while traveling lecturers displayed safety coffins and mechanical mannequins to paying audiences. The fear even shaped language. Phrases like "saved by the bell" and "dead ringer" gained resonance from tales of last-minute rescues. The princess's ordeal crystallized these anxieties. Whether one tragic case or a composite of several, the story sped across borders, retold in salons and medical lectures alike. Royal households quietly took notice. Some monarchs instructed that holes be drilled in their coffins or that guards remain on watch for days. Others ordered second and third medical examinations before burial. Inventors soon responded. From the 1790s onward, designs from simple bell and cord systems to Franz Wester's 1829 U.S. patent with a flag and breathing vent promised rescue for anyone who might awaken underground. Parallel to private innovation came public infrastructure. In Germany and Switzerland, cities built Leichenhäuser, waiting mortuaries, where bodies lay on catafalques for days while attendants watched for movement. Some attached wires from fingers to overhead bells, so even a faint contraction would give warning. In Paris and Vienna, funeral societies guaranteed a doctor's second or third visit before final interment. These measures, both practical and theatrical, reassured a public that science alone could not yet comfort. Governments soon codified the precautions. Prussian law required that no body be buried until at least 48 hours had passed. French statutes demanded certification by 2 physicians. In parts of Britain and the United States, similar waiting periods and multiple attestations became standard. These regulations represented more than bureaucracy. They acknowledged that death itself could be misread. Meanwhile, medical technology caught up with the fear. The invention of the stethoscope in 1816 allowed doctors to hear even faint heartbeats. By the late 19th century, electrocardiography offered visible proof of cardiac activity. Neurology later introduced brain death criteria, turning a philosophical dilemma into a clinical definition. Each breakthrough narrowed the window of uncertainty that had terrified earlier generations. But in the decades before these tools, the public imagination remained gripped by the possibility of premature burial. Popular prints depicted desperate hands clawing at coffin lids. Sermons warned congregations to prepare their souls, for even the boundary between life and death might blur. For Europe's royal houses, the lessons were personal. Funerals were political theater, meant to project power and continuity. A single error could become a dynastic scandal. Diaries from the early 19th century reveal monarchs quietly ordering breathing holes, alarm systems, or round-the-clock watchers for their own burials. These private precautions underscored a very public anxiety that even those with every advantage could be undone by a silent heartbeat. The buried-alive princess thus became both symbol and catalyst. Her story, half legend, half medical cautionary tale, encouraged innovations that spread far beyond palaces. Safety coffins moved from curiosity to mainstream commodity. By mid-century, advertisements promised absolute security against premature interment, complete with detailed engravings of cords, bells, and ventilating tubes. Graveyards themselves adapted, adding bell towers and watch houses to reassure grieving families. Although many rescue stories were exaggerated or invented, enough genuine cases existed to keep the market thriving. People continued to request above-ground vigils or cremation well into the 20th century. The ringing of a bell over a grave remained a potent metaphor for last-minute deliverance. Today, modern medicine makes such tragedies almost impossible. Continuous heart monitoring, brain death protocols, and embalming standards leave virtually no room for doubt. Premature burial has become a statistical rarity. Yet the psychological shadow of earlier centuries still shapes funeral customs. Some families specify cremation to remove even a theoretical risk. Museums display 19th-century safety coffins with cords and bells, drawing visitors who half expect to hear an echo from the past. The princess's story endures because it speaks to something larger than a single historical incident. It illustrates a time when the line between life and death was thin, when technology lagged behind biology, and when ceremony sometimes outran caution. Whether she was a real individual or a composite drawn from several premature burials, her legend reflects documented medical failures. Coffins unearthed with torn shrouds, bodies found face down, scratches gouged into wood. Literature and popular culture continue to keep the memory alive. From Poe's The Premature Burial to modern films and thrillers, the buried alive motif remains one of horror's most enduring images. Above all, the case demonstrates how fear can drive innovation. The bell on a coffin lid was not superstition alone. It was a bridge between anxiety and engineering. It forced doctors, lawmakers, and ordinary families to rethink what it meant to declare a person dead. In doing so, it accelerated medical science and changed funeral practices across Europe and beyond. Walk into certain European crypts today and you may still see small tubes or forgotten cords, relics of an anxious century. Guides in old cities tell visitors about the princess who knocked for mercy, blending fact and legend into a single, unforgettable image. Rationalists may dismiss these stories as coincidence or embellishment, yet each retelling honors a real historical problem and the reforms born from it. The question first raised by a muffled knock in a royal chapel, "What if the dead are not dead?" helped close the gap between life and burial. It ensured that future generations would be guarded not just by stone, but by science. The old coffins with bells stand as proof of how a single haunting possibility reshaped medicine, law, and culture. The princess may never ring again, but the world she inspired continues to listen.